episode of Moments of Experience is brought to you by Astra Wellbeing, a modern technology platform backed by the Massachusetts Hospital Association that helps healthcare organizations engage and retain their workforce by empowering patients, families, and peers to send real-time messages of positive support to staff. I've tried sending a message of appreciation through the platform myself. It's as easy as sending a text, and it can be implemented into organizations in less than 24 hours. Everyone has their own moment of extraordinary human experience, and with Astra Wellbeing, you can make sure that moment gets amplified.
Come on, Mo. Good boy. Come on.
Welcome to Moments of Experience, a podcast inspired by my faithful best friend, Mo, a 14-year-old beagle who gave us moments of hope, compassion, and love during a time of tragic loss and life-threatening family illness. I'm your host, Geoffrey Smith, and I invite you to join me for powerful, uplifting, and sometimes even challenging conversations with some of the world's leading innovators in employee, patient, caregiver, and human experience. Together, we dive into the meaningful moments that shape us, move us, and inspire us to pursue our purpose in life. I'm glad you chose to join us as we explore the big and small moments that bring meaning to our lives and connect us to our true calling. So welcome to a new episode of Moments of Experience, brought to you by my partner, Astra Wellbeing. I'm so excited to my guest today. One reason is I recently read him and some of his co-authors' book, which I loved, so I want to talk about that. But as everyone that listens to the show or watches the show knows, I don't like canned bios. I think they're boring. So I always start the show by introducing my guest in my own words and how they show up to me. And Mohammad Anwar is a founder, a CEO, a pilot, a best-selling author, and a culture facilitator who, through leading with fear, turned the American dream into a nightmare, but learned from it and turned a tech company into a culture company by embodying love as a business strategy.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that introduction. It's different. Thank you.
Feel free to introduce yourself in any way you'd like the audience to see you.
No, I think you did a good job, but if you want to refer to me as Mo or Mohammed on the podcast, I would respond to both.
Okay. All right. Well, the podcast is named after my 14-year-old beagle, Mo. So the audience is used to hearing Mo a lot on the podcast.
Gotcha.
So hopefully it won't be confusing. But I always start the show on sharing with my audience what resonates with me about your work. What's something I've learned from you? Because those are the reasons I invite people on, because something has truly resonated. And my listeners have heard me talk a lot about kind of a different way I approach culture at work and a different way I approach measurement and execution of engagement programs at work, where I work with a very bottom-up, team-based approach to engagement, to culture, to look at things and measure things team by team. Because when we look at those bite-sized pieces and we see where our pockets of brilliance are inside an organization, it's a lot easier to scale, a culture change or an engagement program or whatever the case may be. Because when we find out where our 5 out of 5 all-in engaged teams are, guess what we also found? We found our best local team leaders. And then that's really the way to change a culture. So I want to quote your book, which is Love as a Business Strategy. And there was a page that just stopped me in my tracks. And I just started jotting down notes, and it ties into that bottom-up approach and how you truly make transformational change in the world of work. And you said in the book, one person can change a team can change a department, and a department can change an organization. And I know one of the big themes in the book is how difficult a journey the transformation is. And even for you guys that wrote the book on it and work with other companies around building that culture of love inside your walls, it's a constant you have to continue at it constantly, and it's a big job. So can you just talk about at a high level just how it starts at such a local, personal and team level, but then that's what allows you to scale love through an entire organization?
Yeah, sure. There's a saying that many of us want change but don't want to change. And I'd start with that as the baseline hypothesis that if we want to see change in any organization, the change has to start with you or me or I, right? And so the whole approach is that if we want to see change, we must be willing to change first to see the change around us. And so the whole idea is that anyone can be a catalyst for change inside of the organization. You can influence change. You can't just say, oh, I'm so-and-so in the organization. I don't have the power. I don't have the authority. I don't have influence. But the reality is every human has influence within their own sphere of influence that they interact with. It could be just your teammates. It could even be your boss. It could be people you lead. And so all of us have the capacity to influence change. We can't change people, but we can influence change. But we can change ourselves. And if we are able to change ourselves, then we have the capacity to influence change around us. Because especially if you're trying to change for the better, which is for humanity, which is through love, it is contagious. Because who doesn't want to be influenced by someone who's positive, uplifting, empathetic, loving? I mean, if I'm surrounded by people like that, I would want to be influenced by them. So if we can be the catalyst of change that comes from a place of love, then we can truly inform the expected behaviors around us. We can model the behaviors for others to follow. And so there's a lot of power to the fact that change can come from anywhere, but it has to begin with the individual.
Yeah, and my very first guest on this show in season 1, 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗁𝗂, she's one of the world's leading educators on putting compassion into practice in the world of healthcare. And she says love and compassion are the only things in the world that can really impact 3 parties. They can impact the giver, the receiver, but also the observer. And that's when you talk about in a workplace idea that is contagious, right? And
That's
one of
correct.
the things I've talked about in this show often is many times people inside of organizations, even inside of healthcare, which is my business, they introduce themselves as I'm just the food service worker, or I'm just the environmental services person or janitor or whatever. And I really stop people in that, because I've seen so many times where, I tell the story on the show often, a food service employee that sang to my wife during her battle with cancer, that uplifted her. We had a wonderful environmental services person that always came in and called us by name and asked us how we were and was so genuine. So to your point, true transformation around love and culture and inside the workplace happens at every level with every individual. And the only way it works is if everyone is all in and on board. And so that's one thing I truly, truly appreciate about your work.
Thank you. Yeah.
Another thing, I mentioned earlier, we talk about the journey of culture transformation and how difficult that is to maintain. And it's just a constant effort. And I talk a lot about healthcare in my world. I know you do this in all industries. But in healthcare, I like to say they tend to be at the forefront of clinical innovation, yet lag 30 years behind other industries in people strategy or really looking at things. It's why I evangelize this bottom up, because versus a top down once a year survey, that's how they view engagement. But I want to give, real time data, team by team, find out where our best team leaders are. One thing, I wrote down a quote from your book, and I thought it was really powerful, because in my career, I've always tried to judge decision makers at organizations in the first 20 minutes. do they view their people as their greatest asset or their largest expense? And I've never run a successful culture or people project with anyone I deemed a red light. I call the green lights people that view their people as their greatest asset, and red lights the people that view their people as their largest payroll expense. I've never run a successful transformation project around their people with anyone I deemed a red light after 20 minutes. And a quote from your book, he said, when you are willing to abandon old ways of working, you are ready for innovation. And I thought that was so key. And so can you talk about, with a lot of the companies you work with, I'm sure they are green lights, in truly wanting to change and building a culture of love inside their organization. But if you guys had any, I never had any success, but if you had any success with people that originally weren't open to change and that you were able to change their mind?
Oh, yeah. I think the key to, when you look at changing humans, a lot of institutions resort to training. And I think that's fundamentally flawed, because what you're trying to do is give them new skills, which is, how to use a particular tool or a process. And especially from my experience in healthcare, they're very process driven, very, very process oriented. And they try to overcome human conditions with even processes. Their solution to human conditions is just add another process. Just add another process. So they have process over process over process over process, because they are unable to change human behavior. So they just slap another process. And their approach to changing human behavior is, let's just do training. Let's just train. But what they don't understand is that training is a good source of knowledge and learning certain things that are more skills, that are hard skills, right? But when you think about change, you are asking a person to change their behavior, which is fundamentally unlearn how they knew how to do something or how they behave, to adapting a new way of working, a new way of behaving. And you can't do that through training. You can only do that through experiences. And so we have to create an experience that gets a person to unlearn their old behaviors, because they need to fundamentally experience something new, believe in it before they abandon their old ways of working. So you can't just come to an employee and say, hey, from here on out, this is how you're going to behave. People are like, oh, you can give me all the training you want. I ain't going to change my behavior. It's the same example with smoking or quitting smoking or going to work out and stuff. You can do all the education you want on how smoking is injurious to health. It doesn't mean someone's just going to stop that habit and change, right? Because only so much of data and facts can lead to behavior change. Experiences lead to behavior change. And so we believe that the core element of changing culture comes down to changing people's behaviors. And the way you change people's behaviors is through creating experiences that make them shed their old beliefs, their old ways of behaving, old ways of working, and adapt new ways of working. But they're not going to be committed to do that unless they actually experience something different for themselves to now formulate new beliefs, new behaviors. So the approach to these type of changes inside of the organization are going to be very crucial in how we create those experiences. You can't just go roll out new values in the hospital or your organization, slap it on the walls and say, okay, we've done it. People should start behaving differently just because they see it on the walls. That's a fundamental mistake that most leaders do. And the only way you can really change people's behaviors is by creating experiences that model those behaviors and let them experience how it feels to be on the recipient side of those newfound behaviors. And that's the only way that they can then say, well, you know what? I felt pretty good when my leader actually recognized me, values me, considers my human emotions and conditions. Then I might want to do the same. So I can't just keep saying, read these values and start changing your behaviors. It just doesn't work that way. So That's kind of a core difference in our approach and our philosophy to create meaningful change and adaptation to change, and willing to let go of old ways and adapt new ways. And old ways, a lot of the times, has gotten people to the success that they have today. They've reached the ladders of leadership by having those old behaviors and old ways of working. So going up to them and saying, hey, now you need to let go of your old behaviors that got you success and adapt new behaviors. They're like, who the hell are you? I've been successful all along. Why should I listen to you? So that's kind of the challenge. The higher you go up in the ladders of leadership, the more resistant they are to new ways of working. And you'll see the hunger more in the floor levels and the front lines, because they have a true desire to change for betterment. Whereas the leaders might be so far away from that reality, and they're so comfortable with their power and their privilege that they may not actually have a commitment to change. So there's this whole ecosystem we have to unravel inside of organizations to create meaningful change.
About the beginning, the bottom up, the local team leader is who drives culture. I was recently with a CHRO at a large health system, and I just looked at her. I said, you don't own engagement. And she actually hugged me. And she was like, thank you for saying that. She's like, but can I ask a follow-up? Like, who does? And I said, your local team leader. So you need to put them in position to make sure their people feel seen, heard, valued. Because that's what ultimately engagement is. I talk about it from the employee experience side, seen, heard, valued. I talk about it through the patient experience side, seen, heard, cared for. That's where patients become engaged in their care journey. So it does start from the bottom, and it does start with every person, like you mentioned, at an organization. And how you talked about just slapping some words, mission, vision, values up on the wall. But it comes down to, until your people trust you, until they see you embody, love as a business strategy and these ideas. And I worked with one of the world's leading researchers on people, performance, team dynamic, and culture at work. He was the original author of Strength Finders and still since built a better model. But one thing he said is people are very poor raters of other people. It's why performance reviews don't really work, or just, as you said, just training or what. But what they are very accurate and great raters of is how something makes them feel. When you measure how something makes your workforce feel, you know what you have? You have 100% accurate data. And then you have actionable data to act on. And I think that's a lot of what you and your team have created at Softway, just a feeling of, I had a CEO of a health system where I ran an engagement program there, and we were looking at all the metrics, and he said, Jeff, these are great, and I'm glad we've tripled engagement and lowered first-year nurse retention, and raised first-year nurse retention. And he said, but you know what? This place just feels different. And I think that's really what you guys create, is just a different feeling where teammates have each other's backs, and managers treat people with respect and true, as I said, seen, heard, valued. So I appreciate that.
And I would say feeling is the outcome, but what we create is experiences and the environment for those feelings to exist. So think of it as, we would go with the organizations and say, here's the environment and experiences you should create so you garner the right feelings from the employees. So the goal is to create the environment and experiences that ultimately lead to the positive feelings versus the negative feelings. And that's how the strategy we would approach with them. And then also from the bottom up to top down, we actually try to emphasize both and. We want it to be from all levels. We do agree that the immediate experiences that your frontline staff experience are with their own teammates, right? With their people on the same floor, not the C-suite that's sitting in their ivory tower, right? But since it's such a big ecosystem, that is controlled with, like in healthcare, it's inundated processes and regulations and governance and all kinds of compliance and stuff, and they have warranted reasons to do all of it, but I think it's overdone at the premise of you can't trust people, so let's trust process. And it's overly process driven. And so if we really need to unravel this environment to create an environment where there is high levels of performance and engagement and reliability, while we start at the floor level, we also have to make sure we attack it from the top down as well, to make sure they're helping us release the environments so that these good managers can be empowered and successful in doing what they do best because of the characteristics and traits and the feelings that they create or environments they create for their team. So we like to hit it like at all angles. Like you said, everybody is responsible, but it must come from all areas in the org. And measurement-wise, spot on. We like to measure experiences, because how I experience each, like another employee or my boss, is a fact that cannot be debated, right? When you look at other metrics, like when you look at other data sets, if we look at a data set like, certain type of financial data or metrics around conversion rates or appointment to show up rates, right? There's many ways to interpret it. I could argue, I could debate with you, right? But there's one thing that's not debatable: people's experiences. That's a fact. I can't come and say, Jeff, your experience of my hospital team, I don't think, like, I'm going to debate that with you. I mean, that's a fact that I cannot dispute, I cannot argue, I cannot debate. So it is very pertinent information if we're able to capture our team's experiences with each other within our organization. That becomes factual data that cannot be dismissed, that cannot be debated, that cannot be manipulated by the leadership to make it look like in a more positive trend for themselves. So while we respect engagement data, we don't believe engagement data gives the full picture of the why. So we believe if you tie engagement data together with experiential data, now you have a full picture of your organization's why is the engagement high or low. Like engagement surveys today will tell you, benchmark against other industry or, comparable entities and say you're in this percentile, you're in this, the engagement is at this level and this level. But if you want to truly understand why is the engagement low, we got to measure experience. And so that's kind of how we try to coalesce both those pieces of data so it becomes indisputable facts to bring to leaders to make meaningful change.
And the engagement data I work with is not traditional engagement data. Mine is the experiential data that we're pulling. And I'll tell you a quick story. I was recently at a health system that was caring for my wife during her battle with cancer. And this is how I connected, as you said, because you do need top down as well. It's not just bottom up. You need everybody all in. But I was having trouble with this healthcare system who I was working with on their engagement program. I was having trouble getting buy-in top down, but I was getting a lot of traction bottom up. And there was this one floor where everything was different. I mentioned the food service employee sang to her. The nurse leader was one of the most compassionate, empathetic people I've ever met in my life. Everyone just led with love and compassion. And I could go down one floor and it felt completely different, right? So I went to the CHRO of this 27,000 plus employee health system. And I said, hey, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to pull patient experience scores and employee experience scores from this one floor. And their answer was quite telling. I was like, well, Jeff, we don't pull it that way. It's an organizational metric. And I said, please do me this favor. I want this one floor. And it took them like 60 days, 45 days, something like that. And he calls me up and he said, Jeff, through the roof. I've never seen anything like it. The highest employee experience scores, the highest patient experience scores. I've never seen numbers like that. He's like, how did you know? And I said, because I experienced it. Because I was there.
There you go. You got it.
And then all of a sudden, now I got the top-down buy-in. And we're able to scale that experiential program that measured not, do I have a best friend at work? Okay. It asked questions around how someone feel. Did they mention, did they say strongly agree to my teammates have my back? Questions like that. That's true feeling and experience. So I could not agree with you guys more, and how you look at this and creating those experiences that ultimately changes behaviors.
Yep.
So
That's
one
awesome.
last thing, because as the name of the show, Moments of Experience, I always say one of the concepts, we talk about two concepts on every show, and it's human connection and it's authentic presence. And one thing I say on the outro is keep your eyes open and stay authentically present, because you never know when the small experience in life could truly be life-changing. So I'm going to get to your moment in a second, but I want to say one last plug of the book, because one of the things that truly resonated with me, so all my HR listeners and all my recruiting and hiring people, I want you to read the section of this book on humanizing the hiring process, because I was cheering while reading it, because, for all of you with your beautiful applicant tracking systems and your awful hiring processes, learn something from Mohammed's group and read that section.
Can I make one plug then, Jeff, before you go into the moments?
Yeah.
So we do have a second book coming out, September 17th, Love as a Change Strategy. And I think if you love what you're reading in Love as a Business Strategy, then you're in for a treat for Love as a Change Strategy, because in this rapidly changing world, and where the world is, and especially in the workplace where there's a lot of fatigue with so much change and burnout, we have a book that lays out how to lead change from a place of love, and how love can be a compelling way to lead to better change readiness and adaptation versus fear. Because today a lot of change is instituted in organizations from a place of fear. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt adapt this, thou shalt operate this way. And there's very little humanity in a lot of the changes that get implemented. And so very excited about this book. If you're a leader trying to lead through change, transform organizations, go to organizational change, structural change, policy change, this book is a very good playbook to how to lead that change from a people-first approach. So just want to throw that in there.
Oh, no, absolutely.
While you have,
I was
going to
ask you about that at the end, because I am looking forward to that as well. And you talk about all of the change in the workplace. I do a lot of speaking on the generational shift. And so you talked about people that were very successful and not wanting to change. Well, I think leaders are starting to realize that the next generation of the workforce is a little different. And they are going to have to adapt to that, to truly transform with an ever-changing future of work. So the name of the show is Moments of Experience. And I always ask my guests, what was the moment or moments, it doesn't have to be one, but that shaped you, that moved you and inspired you to do the purposeful work you do every day?
Yeah, so it was a series of moments. I can quickly timeline it and take you through the moments that I've had. So it began with, me having a very successful business by age 30 that almost shut down soon thereafter. And in that moment of almost going bankrupt and laying off 1/3 of my workforce, I had this realization that it was actually all my fault. It was my selfish attitude, my greediness, I had become power drunk, and I was responsible for leading a company down to near bankruptcy. And that moment led me to another moment where soon thereafter, I had that realization. I was sitting in an American football game for my University of Houston Cougars, watching them have a miraculous comeback victory, erasing a 20-point deficit in the fourth quarter. That led me to curiosity with how they were able to have such resilience. And it led me to learning about culture of love and how this football team and head coach had used the culture of love as a catalyzing force for this mediocre, talented football team to become have the winningest season in Cougar football history, which was 13-1. And I got very inspired by that, but I also had the realization that I did not lead with love. I did not care for my team the way the football team cared for one another. And so I went on this journey of transforming myself to then ultimately transform our organization that literally saved our business, that then made us thriving, where we were ultimately able to triple our revenues, improve our EBITDA margins by 42 percentage points with 2/3 the staff we originally did. And the next thing you know, our clients knocked on our doors and said, hey, I know you offer technology and communication services, but we would love for you to also support us in our culture initiatives. And we're like, that's not what we do. And they compelled us, led us to start by demand of our customers, started offering culture services. And that's when we found our new purpose and calling, that we actually exist to bring humanity back to the workplace through love. And that led us to do what we do today. So we are a company that helps organizations transform the human way from a people-first lens approach, and using love as the competitive advantage for organizations to become successful. So that's essentially the series of moments in a small, primer that I can give you that led to us becoming what we do today and creating impact for the world.
Amazing story. And I actually remember that 13-1 season from Houston, because I'm a big college football fan, and to see a non-traditional power shake up, the college football landscape with all the very entitled teams that don't want anyone crashing their party. I remember that very well. So I have one question for you, because my sponsor is probably the one most synergistic sponsor for a show ever. It's Astra Wellbeing, and they are a well-being platform for the workplace. They primarily work in healthcare, but it's both a peer-to-peer recognition platform. So people inside the organization can recognize their peer for compassionate care, for wonderful work. But it also do it as easy as a text. And they're also able to have patience, and as easy as saying a text, give encouragement to their care teams or their nurse or whatever the case may be. Can you talk a little bit about where, I know I read in the book, belonging was a big thing, but is there anything Softway does from a recognition standpoint, and to make sure people are encouraging their teammates and things along those lines? Because I've seen some truly transformative numbers when recognition is put in the forefront.
Oh, yeah. I mean, making sure people feel valued, included, respected is the core fundamentals of creating teams that belong, to the organization that they work for. And so we're heavily focused on making sure that the recognition is coming by way of not just being able to vocalize our appreciation, but also making sure we create systems of promotions, spot raises, bonus structures, and other type of recognition, or systems that make people feel valued. And so we definitely preach that, encourage that for organizations to bake in recognition through their entire systems. In addition to the, the gratitude and the expression of recognition as well.
And one thing we talk about with my sponsor is also the amplification. It's great to be able to have one peer recognize the peer, but when you can send that ripple of sharing that story of the food service employee singing to my wife throughout a 25,000 plus employee system, you then see, like we talked about before, just kind of the ripple and how the observation of these wonderful moments of experience can truly transform an organization. So thank you so much for your wonderful story and everything you guys have done. I fully recommend the book, and just by what I've already read, I fully recommend the second book, even though I haven't read it yet. So Mohammad, I appreciate your time. Any last thoughts?
The only ask that I have for the listeners is to lead with heart and lead with love. It's the best solution to a lot of the challenges in the workplace and maybe even in our personal lives. And that would be my encouragement, and it'll definitely help us create change in meaningful ways that can ultimately help change the world. That's my goal, maybe beyond my lifetime. But if we all can start leading with love, we definitely can influence positive change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me. I truly appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for joining us on Moments of Experience. I hope today's conversation touched your heart and inspired you to reflect on the impactful moments in your own life. Remember, it's the seemingly small moments that often hold the most significant power to shape our lives and the lives of those around us. So keep your eyes open and do your best to be authentically present. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with someone who might benefit from our discussions. Until next time, I'm Geoffrey Smith, reminding you to cherish the moments that bring hope, connection, and purpose to your journey.